The town of Gray Hollow was a forgotten place, tucked away in the northernmost part of Montana, where the snow fell in thick blankets and the nights stretched long and dark. It wasn't on any major map, and unless you lived nearby, you'd probably never hear of it. But Gray Hollow had its secrets, a history buried under generations of snow and silence. I wasn't supposed to end up there. My original plan was to drive to Glacier National Park for a solo winter hiking trip, something I'd wanted to do for years. But a blizzard rolled in faster than the forecasts predicted, and the only safe place to stop for the night was Gray Hollow. When I first pulled into town, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. There were no Christmas decorations, no bustling streets, no lights strung across storefronts. Just an endless expanse of white and an unsettling stillness. I found the only motel, a creaky two-story building called the Hollow Inn, run by an elderly woman named Martha Hale. "We don't get many visitors this time of year," she said as she handed me the key. "Especially not on the solstice." "The solstice?" I asked, not catching the significance. Martha nodded. Her pale blue eyes clouded with something I couldn't quite place. "Shortest day of the year, the longest night. Folks around here, they take it seriously." Her words lingered in my mind, but I shrugged them off. After settling into my room, I decided to explore the town. Gray Hollow was tiny, barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around a central square. At the heart of the square stood an old stone fountain, dry and cracked, surrounded by benches buried in snow. Above it loomed a towering tree, an evergreen, massive and ancient, its gnarled branches stretching like skeletal fingers into the gray sky. There was something unsettling about that tree. It wasn't decorated like you'd expect during the Christmas season, and its presence felt wrong. I couldn't explain why, but I hurried past it, finding my way to a small diner where I could warm up with a cup of coffee. Inside, I met Ethan, a local in his early 30s with a rugged face and a thick flannel jacket. He was friendly enough, striking up a conversation as I sat at the counter. "You're not from around here," he said, his tone making it clear it wasn't a question. "No, just passing through," I replied. "Got caught in the storm." He nodded, sipping his coffee. "You picked an interesting time to visit. Solstice night's always different." "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. Ethan hesitated, glancing around as if to make sure no one was listening. "There's an old legend about this place. They say Gray Hollow was founded on a promise. A deal, if you will." "A deal?" He leaned in closer. "Back in the 1800s, when the first settlers came here, the winters were brutal. Crops failed. People starved. They say the townsfolk turned to unconventional methods to survive. A ritual performed under the ancient tree in the square. They offered sacrifices to something in exchange for protection and prosperity." I raised an eyebrow. "You're kidding, right?" Ethan chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Believe what you want, but every solstice, people vanish. Some say it's the town paying its debt." Before I could press him further, the diner door swung open and an icy gust swept in. A tall man in a long coat entered, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The room fell silent as every patron turned to look at him. Ethan straightened, his expression tense. "That's Reverend Crow," he whispered. "If you're smart, you'll stay away from him." That night, I couldn't sleep. Ethan's story gnawed at me, and the howling wind outside only heightened my unease. Around midnight, I heard it, a low, rhythmic chanting, carried on the wind. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. Curiosity got the better of me. I bundled up and stepped outside, the cold biting at my skin. The chanting was coming from the square, where the tree loomed like a dark sentinel against the night sky. As I approached, I saw them. A circle of figures, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks, standing beneath the tree. Reverend Crow was among them, his voice leading the chant in a language I didn't recognize. At the center of the circle, bound and kneeling in the snow, was a young woman. Her muffled cries sent a jolt of fear through me. I hid behind a parked car, my breath fogging in the frigid air as I watched in horror. The chanting reached a crescendo, and the tree seemed to come alive. Its branches writhed as if possessed, casting unnatural shadows on the snow. The air grew heavy, thick with an energy I could feel in my chest, her, dragging her into the earth. The chanting stopped, and the hooded figures dispersed without a word, leaving the square eerily quiet once more. I stumbled back to the motel, my mind racing. I couldn't believe what I'd just witnessed. It was impossible, irrational, but it had happened. I locked my door and sat by the window, keeping watch until dawn. The next morning, I went to the diner, hoping to find Ethan. He wasn't there. In fact, the place was nearly empty, save for Martha, who was sipping tea at one of the booths. I approached her cautiously. "Do you know where Ethan is?" She looked up, her expression somber. "He's gone, like the others." "The others?" Martha sighed, gesturing for me to sit. "Every solstice, the town pays its debt. One life taken by the tree. It's been that way for as long as anyone can remember. But why? What is that thing?" "No one knows for sure," she said. "Some say it's an ancient spirit, older than the town itself. Others believe it's something darker. All we know is that without the sacrifice, the town would wither and die." I couldn't stay. I packed my things and prepared to leave, but when I reached the edge of town, the road was blocked. Fallen trees, their roots twisted unnaturally, formed an impassable barrier. I had no choice but to return. That night, the chanting started again. This time, it was closer. I peered out my window and saw the hooded figures approaching the motel. Panic surged through me as I realized they were coming for me. I fled out the back door, running blindly into the forest. The snow was deep and the cold burned my lungs, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the chanting grew louder, more frantic. The shadows of the hooded figures stretched across the trees, their movements inhumanly fast. When I finally collapsed, exhausted and freezing, I found myself back in the square. The tree loomed above me, its branches twisting and creaking as if beckoning. Reverend Crow stood beneath it, his hood pushed back to reveal a face that was unnervingly serene. "You can't escape," he said. "The tree has chosen you." Before I could respond, the ground beneath me gave way, and I felt the black tendrils wrap around my body, pulling me into the icy depths. I woke up in my car, parked at the edge of Gray Hollow. The storm had passed, and the road was clear. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare, but as I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. In the distance, I saw the tree, its branches reaching skyward like claws, and beneath it, the hooded figures stood silently, watching me leave. To this day, I can still hear the chanting in my dreams, a haunting reminder of the price some are willing to pay to survive.